My husband and I worked together at university. We both worked as lifeguards, and that's where we met. And started out just as friends. And I think, we'd known each other maybe 2 years when it developed into something more. And I was not expecting that we would go any further than just dating. The summer that he graduated in 76, and I graduated in 77. So the summer that he graduated, he was delayed coming on active duty. He was ROTC. And we just dated back and forth. His parents' home was about an hour and a half drive from my parents' home. Washington State. We both went to Washington State University. Like our last night that we had gone out, we were sitting in my parents' living room. My brother had asked the night before, what do you think is going to happen with this relationship? And I said, oh, he's going to go on active duty, and I'm going back to school, and it's been fun, but I don't expect anything more. And so this night we're sitting in my parents' living room, and Bob goes, I want to talk to you about our relationship. And I go, here it comes. Was not ready for what he had to say. I've been giving it a lot of thought, and I think if I were to get married, you'd be the one I want to marry. And I'm going, uh-oh. When he met me, I had a really bad attitude towards the male sex because I had had some really bad relationships. I had this perfect man list. And I pulled it out of my desk, and my roommates are going, you're not being fair, you're not being fair. You're right, I'm not being fair. This is the rest of my life I'm talking about. He came up with 95%. He wanted me to be able to help choose my wedding ring. But he wanted me to have something. So he took a piece of driftwood that had a hole in it that my hand could fit through. And he wood burned a stick man and a stick lady and 2 interlocking circles and proposed to me that way.
How? Do you still have it?
Oh yeah, it's on the wall in my family room. I took it back to school and announced to my roommates, let us see the ring. And I pulled out this piece of driftwood, stuck my hand in it, and they go, only you, Schilling, only you. I always had wanted to get a job and go to Europe and live and work. Didn't quite happen that way, but within a year of being married, we were on our way to Germany. And
close.
Yeah. And we stayed in Germany for 2 tours. So we were there for a total of 6 years. Arrived in Germany in 78 and left Germany in 84. It was during kind of a rough time for our country. We were dealing with the Iran hostage situation, and the barracks in Lebanon were bombed. And every time something like that happened, it affected us in Germany. 2 weeks after I arrived in Germany, the Officers Club at Heidelberg was bombed. I think the next big one was, there was a big terrorist organization called the Baader-Meinhof Gang, and Baader was in prison and died in prison. Well, come to find out, she's from the village 2 kilometers from my village. So we had to stay out of that village from dawn until dusk. And we had a lot of Americans that lived in Inkenbach-Alsenborn. But they were afraid of terrorist activity because, the Baader-Meinhof Gang was still active.
Okay.
And she had died in prison, and I'm not sure how she died, but I have a feeling it wasn't natural causes.
Something happened.
Terrorists were very, very active in Germany for sure in the 70s and the 80s. I can remember the travel agent that I worked with talking about, she had just loaded a bus with tourists from a hotel in Frankfurt, and I can't remember the name of it. And she had a problem and had to go back in and talk to the concierge, and her bus was bombed. In the 80s, they started targeting Americans. We started checking our cars if we were on the economy, and I lived on and worked on the economy, so I checked mine before I got in it all the time.
Yeah.
And we had these bright green license plates that said USA on them. Would have been the summer of '82. The terrorists had gotten an American plated car and placed a bomb in it, drove it on base at the headquarters at Ramstein, and parked it in front of the headquarters building and blew it up.
Oh my gosh.
And so at that time, things started changing. We ended up having to have a sticker in our windshield that had our license plate number on it. So they couldn't just steal a license plate, they would have to steal the whole car.
This idea of terrorists and terrorisms and security on bases and all these things, it's not new.
My family would call, and we had a telephone, which when we first moved to Germany, we waited 3 years for a telephone. Yeah. But we had a telephone, then they called and they were worried. And I said, listen to CNN. I said, that's what I do. I said, not only do I listen to it, when something weird happens on CNN, I call the command post and say, you might want to watch this. I had instructions from my husband to call. It was very close to the East German border. And the Russians driving through with their listening devices and that sort of thing, you had to watch what you're saying. You always answered the phone. This line is not secure, unless you happen to be on a secure line, so that people would know not to say things that might be taken and used by our enemies. I think once every 3 or 4 months I would run a bus to Berlin. It had to be a military bus. Our military members had to be in uniform. They traveled on their ID cards. We traveled on our passports, and we had special orders called flag orders, and everything had to be 100% character aligned, because the little Russian privates that checked you at their checkpoints didn't know how to read English, and so if a period was out of place, you were kicked out.
You were done.
You were done. So we had to make sure that the travel document matched the ID card or the passport. And you would start, if you were in Germany, there were 3 ways you could go on the troop train. You could fly into Berlin, or you could drive the corridor. We would start at checkpoint A, which was Helmstadt, Germany, and we would go through the British checkpoint, because that was the British sector in those days.
Okay.
And then we would go about 500 yards, and we would go through the first Russian checkpoint. And one representative, which usually was me, had to get out of the bus, had to salute this little Russian private, and hand our documents over. He went through all the documents and checked them. Then he handed them back to me, and I had to take them over to a kiosk and salute that one and hand my documents over. And he went through everything. Then they took the documents into the kiosk, and somebody else went through them. And then they brought them back out, and the guy went through the documents, and the little private went through the documents again. So it's like,
how long did it? And so there was a process.
And we only had 2 hours in which to drive the corridor.
To get.
Or if we were over time, it was an international incident.
Can you talk about where you were and kind of like what the overall your experience was during Desert Storm, Desert Shield, kind of that time frame?
I can.
In the military?
We moved to Germany in the summer of '90. I had an infant, well, sort of an infant. She didn't think she was an infant. And Bob had just arrived in Germany when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. It was also the day that my daughter decided she was going to walk for the first time.
Oh my goodness.
She was exactly 9 months old, and she was, because she was premature, she was kind of small.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a really hot day. I was at my sister's house and I was babysitting her kids, and we're all, we had one of those blow up swimming pools, and Sabina pushed off on that blow up swimming pool and walked across the yard, and I went, what? Things were not what I considered normal. I was really glad that I had lived in Germany for 6 years before, knew the customs, had German friends, that sort of thing. We were ramping up we were in Desert Shield and ramping up for Desert Storm. And we were also at an Air Force base that was closing. And so whole squadrons were deploying, and their families were going home. They didn't want to make friends. They weren't going, they're going home. And
so no one really knew what this was going to entail.
There were certain places designated throughout Europe and Turkey and this sort of thing where they would bring people. It would be like an empty building, sort of, but could be used as a hospital for all of the wounded that were expected. And so we had squadrons of people leaving. We also had a squadron of people that came in that were nurses and doctors and med techs and lab technicians and that sort of thing to man this auxiliary hospital. I told Bob, I said, it's a good thing that I understand the customs and the language, because this would be hell otherwise, especially with a baby. And 9/11 really, really messed with us because he was at headquarters CENTCOM. So he was working 20-hour days. He was home, but he wasn't. He was gone before she woke up in the morning, and he came home after she'd gone to bed. And she was in middle school. And I didn't realize how much it was affecting her until the Florida Rights prompt that year was, "Who's your hero?" And she wrote that her dad was her hero, and she realized she had to give him up so he could help save the world.
For me too, I see the toll that it takes on my kids, and it's given them amazing opportunities and experiences, and I wouldn't trade it, any of it.
No.
But a lot is asked of them.
It is. A lot is asked. And, she was used to her dad being gone because the job he had before, he was gone every other week for a week. But this really got to her, the fact that, and finally after, I think, a month or two, my husband said, I need Sunday mornings off to go to church. So, and to spend time with our daughter. And so, it affects the kids. It really affects the kids. And they're different things. When he was in Iraq, we were able to communicate by computer, by email. But my computer was badly infected, so a buddy of mine was fixing it, and I was on his computer trying to see Bob's emails. And in one email, he had sent pictures. And I said, Sabina, come in here, Daddy sent pictures. And she walks in and she sees about a third of a picture, and it was just the red webbing that you have of the web seats on the inside of the cargo planes. And she just saw that and she goes, Daddy's on an airplane. And Don looks up and he goes, how the hell does she know that? And I said, because she's ridden in those web seats. When we would take hops, she had ridden in those web seats. In fact, she'd ridden in that's what she remembered. We got on a regular plane to go home from Japan, and she gets on the plane, she goes, Mom, they've got seats. And we didn't have to have earplugs, and we didn't have to bring our own food, and we didn't have to bring blankets to keep us warm.
People fly around?
We were at Sembach Air Force Base, and the base commander had decreed that officers' wives wouldn't work. So therefore, when I applied for any job, like at AFES or any of the civil service or non-appropriated fund jobs, the first thing they said was, we can't look at your application, you're an officer's wife.
And so were you able to get,
I did.
able finally?
Yeah, I went to work for Service Federal Credit Union. They didn't belong to the base, so they didn't care about what the base commander said.
And he said it based on what? Just
his
idea of what?
That was what he decreed. That was, and in those days, they could go with that. It was allowed.
And like you said, also then that's where on their OERs.
Yes, on their officer evaluation reports in those days, there was a section where we spouses were rated.
Based on how much trouble you were for them, or
based on how much volunteer time we put in, how much we did, like with the Officer Spouses Club or whatever.
To hear that now, and younger spouses, understandably so, often will ask me like, well, how do I keep my career? And I don't want to have to jeopardize my job and my career for all the traveling. And
it continued like that. I can remember when we were in Hawaii, and a bunch of us would meet on Thursday afternoons, and we would sail the dinghies in little races, and then have a potluck barbecue afterwards. And there was this gal who had, she was a newlywed. She was established in her career, and she married a full colonel. And she was told she had to give up her job. And she says, I don't think so. And it happened to a gal that married a general, and she went to Congress on it in 1987. And that's when things started to change. She said, why should I have to do this? And the Army especially expected women to do things. I can remember a girlfriend of mine got a call from her husband's commander's wife, saying that she needed to make cookies because they were coming back from deployment, and she goes, no, you have to do it. It will affect his career if you don't. And she goes, contrary to popular belief, he's a captain. I'm a major. He doesn't do anything for my troops. And when he was commander, I had to go to the key spouse things. I can remember we had functions. When we were in Japan, we had functions in springtime every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I spent more money I kept one whole family of 4 in babysitting jobs.
Right.
Because my daughter was 3 when we got there. And
well, now that becomes like your entire, now it's not just his job, but it's everything. It's your whole social life. It's your whole, you're not able to dictate any of that.
Nope. He supported me. And once he made captain, he says, if you don't want to go to those functions, you don't have to. Once he was a commander, I did. I needed to go and do those things. But he was always supportive of my jobs. I can remember him coming along on my tours when I was escorting tours, and he and the bus driver figuring out a better way to go someplace with the maps and stuff. I'm horrible with a map.
The key is oftentimes if the service member understands that, hey, I'm in this for the long haul, I love what we're doing and I support your job, but I also need to have things that are mine.
That's it. We made some really good friends. I mean, I have German friends that we've been friends for 35, 36 years, and we're still in contact. And when we go to visit Germany, obviously we visit them, and that sort of, I have Japanese friends. I gained a lot more than, I mean, those first years were pretty rough, especially with that base commander and his commander that was interfering in our life all the time. But the friendships that we've, international friendships and people that we can count on no matter what. And confidence to know that I can go into any situation and I can deal with it. I mean, I didn't have that when I first started. I had no clue. I didn't have a lot of self-confidence. If you are overseas and you stay on base and you just sit there and do nothing, you're gonna be upset. It's negative and it breeds negativity and there's gossip and that sort of thing. If you go out and experience what there is to be offered and make friendships outside of the base, it's much better. You grow. And then after he retired, we moved here.
Okay.
And then we moved to Okinawa and back here. So I don't know, 14
What brought you
moves.
here?
He went to work for Defense Logistics Agency.
Okay, so job.
So job, yeah.
And how'd you feel about coming here after all the?
I was so psyched.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Because you ended in Tampa.
Yeah,
And then
we stayed in Tampa
Okay.
after he retired because you couldn't put a price on my daughter's friends. As she was going into high school, and they were being raised as strict as we were raising her, or stricter. And so we stayed.
Yeah.
I hate the heat and the humidity. I just hate it.
But you did it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so then you were jazzed to come up here.
I was.
This is
I
your,
was
this
so
is your
jazzed
weather.
to
Yeah.
come up here because I'm originally from the wet side of Washington State.
Oh, so this you fit right in.
Yes, and mountains and stuff. I grew
Yes.
up on a mountain.
Oh my gosh, so this did feel like home.
Oh yes,